My son looked me straight in the eye and said, "Serve his fiancée or leave quietly." That was it. No argument, no hesitation, just those words. I'd spent my whole life raising him, building this house, keeping everything together after his father died, and now I was being asked to serve the woman he brought home. I didn't shout, I didn't beg. I just looked at him and realized he didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as someone in his way. So I nodded, smiled like it didn't break me, and went upstairs to pack my things. The suitcase was old, the same one I used when I helped him move into his first apartment. Back then, he cried when I left. This time, he didn't even look up. He thought I was leaving quietly. But what I did after that, he never saw coming. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 68 years old. I've lived in this house almost my entire life. It's not fancy, but it's mine. Every wall here has something I built, something I fixed, something I kept alive. That's why it hit me when my son looked me in the eye and said, "Serve his fiancée or leave quietly." He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just said it like he was reading a rule I had already broken. I didn't answer. I just kept looking at him, waiting for a sign he didn't mean it. It never came. That night started like any other. I made dinner. I always did. Chicken, potatoes, pie for dessert. I wanted things to feel normal, maybe even warm. I should have known better. Evan and Clara came late. They didn't knock. Evan walked in first, still on his phone, no hello. Clara followed him, filming a short clip for whatever she does online. She said, "Dinner at Maple Haven, kind of vintage vibe." Then she smiled at me like I was a part of the set. We sat down. Evan ate without talking. Clara talked enough for both of them. She said their apartment was small, too noisy, not good for the baby. Then she said they might stay here for a while. I asked, "Stay here?" She nodded. "It's quiet, there's space, it just makes sense." Evan didn't look up. He said, "Yeah, it's better for her. You'd be more comfortable somewhere smaller, Mom. Maybe one of those art places you liked." I felt my stomach turn. "You want me to leave my house?" He shook his head. "Not leave, just move somewhere better for you." Clara smiled. "Or you could stay and help out. Cooking, laundry, baby things, just till I recover." I looked at her. "Help or serve?" She laughed. "Same thing, isn't it?" That was it. The air in the room changed. I looked at my son, the same boy I raised in this kitchen, the one who used to ask for extra dessert, and I didn't recognize him. He kept eating. She kept talking. And I sat there, realizing this wasn't my family anymore. Nobody said another word for a long time. The sound of forks on plates was all there was. I watched the pie I'd made go untouched. I could feel the anger crawling up my throat, but I kept it down. I wasn't going to cry in front of them. Evan finally said, "You'd like Silverwood. It's got art programs, nurses, a garden." I nodded slowly. "You've already looked into it?" He hesitated. "Just in case." That told me everything. I pushed my chair back. "You've both made yourselves at home," I said quietly. "Just don't expect me to serve." Clara gave a small laugh, trying to play it off. Evan looked down again. I stood up. "Enjoy your meal." I didn't wait for an answer. I walked away step by step, like every sound in the house was new to me. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I just felt done. For years, I'd built my life around him, his school, his job, his happiness. I thought that's what mothers do, but that night, I realized I was the only one still holding on. I opened the closet and pulled out the old suitcase. It was the same one I used when I sent him off to college. I remember him hugging me at the door, saying, "Don't cry, Mom. I'll be back." And now he wanted me gone. I set the suitcase on the bed and opened it. The sound of the zipper cut through the noise of their voices downstairs. I didn't know where I'd go. I didn't have a plan. But I knew I wasn't staying here under their rules. I folded a few clothes, slowly, carefully. I thought about every year I had spent trying to make him proud. Now I just wanted to make myself free. Their laughter echoed from below. Her laugh was sharp, his nervous. I closed the suitcase, looked at it for a moment, and said out loud, "Then I suppose I'll start packing early." I didn't mean later, I meant now. A week later, they moved in. No warning, no discussion. Just a text from Evan the night before. We'll come by in the morning with some boxes. Boxes. That's what they called it. But it wasn't a few boxes. It was a truck. She came with cameras, ring lights, and 2 people I'd never met, her content team. They carried in tripods, soft panels, boxes of clothes, and stacks of cardboard signs with her name printed in big letters. I stood at the doorway, trying to stay out of the way. "Don't worry, Mom," Evan said, waving his hand like it was all under control. "It's temporary, just while Clara builds her brand." He said it like brand was something sacred. Clara walked past him, looking around like a real estate agent. "This lighting isn't bad," she said, "but we'll need to fix the background, maybe hang a neon sign." Before I could say anything, one of her assistants pointed at the wall behind the couch. "That's perfect," he said. "That wall had my husband's painting on it. He made it years ago. A quiet landscape, nothing fancy, but it was his." She didn't even ask. She just said, "Can someone take that down? It's too dark for the shot." They pulled it off the wall like it meant nothing. The next day there was a neon sign in its place. "Glow up every day." It buzzed faintly all night. I asked Evan about it later. "It's just for a while," he said. "She's doing a campaign. It'll help her visibility." I looked at the sign again. "Glow up every day." "I suppose I'll just fade quietly then," I said. He smiled a little, not sure if I was joking. I wasn't. By the second day, my kitchen looked different. My tea tins were gone, replaced with labeled jars she'd bought online. My recipe cards, the ones written in my husband's handwriting, weren't on the counter anymore. There were protein bars and vitamins instead. When I opened the cupboard, half my things were boxed up. She said, "I thought I'd organize it for you. You had so much clutter." Clutter. That's what she called 30 years of living. Evan didn't notice. He spent most of his time in the study with his headset on, talking to people from work. Every time I passed the door, I heard him say, "Yeah, Mom's fine. She's adjusting." I wasn't adjusting. I was disappearing, one drawer at a time. The crew came again the next week. They filmed in the living room, then the kitchen. They asked me to stay out of the shot. Clara smiled at me sweetly and said, "You don't mind, do you? It's just easier if the background's clean." She meant empty. That night, I went to make tea. My favorite mug, the one with a crack my husband said gave it character, was gone. I found it in a cardboard box labeled "Donate or Toss." I stood there for a long time, holding the box, listening to the hum of the new appliances she'd installed. Everything gleamed, everything matched, and nothing felt like mine. The next morning, she asked, "Can we change the curtains? The color's depressing." I said nothing. Evan looked at me like he was waiting for a reaction, but I didn't give him one. That seemed to make him nervous. At lunch, she said, "You don't have to cook, you know. We can handle that." She meant she didn't want me touching the kitchen. When I walked in later, she'd ordered takeout. The smell of plastic containers filled the room. That evening, I found one of my husband's old photo albums under a pile of boxes in the hallway. It was bent at the corners, a shoe print on the cover. I cleaned it, sat at the table, and flipped through the pages alone. His handwriting was there, notes about the photos, Evan's first day of school, summer 1991. It didn't feel like my house anymore. It felt like a set for someone else's life. When they went to bed, I stayed in the kitchen. The neon sign in the next room still glowed through the doorway, pink, too bright, too loud. It hit the pie tin on the counter, the same one I'd used the night of that dinner, and the reflection flashed across the wall. Somewhere upstairs, I heard Clara talking on the phone. Her voice carried down the hall. "She's sweet," she said, "but she's so out of place." There was a pause, then laughter. "She means well, but it's like living with a ghost." I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, in the dark kitchen, staring at that stupid neon sign until my eyes started to burn. The house was full of sound, laughter, voices, the buzzing light, but somehow I'd never heard it feel so quiet. That was the first time I realized what she was really doing. She wasn't moving in. She was replacing me, and he was letting her. I woke up early the next morning, thinking I'd make tea before they came downstairs. It's something I've done for years. Boil the water, open the window a little, breathe. But when I walked into the kitchen, there was a note taped to the cabinet. No use of kitchen 7 to 10 a.m. Filming in progress. Clara? I just stood there for a second, holding the kettle. The handwriting was neat with a little heart at the end. It didn't sound like a request. It sounded like a rule. The counters were different again. My ceramic cups, the ones I'd had since my wedding, were gone. The floral plates I'd brought from Maine, gone too. In their place were clear glasses and white bowls, all identical, all new. Even the towels had changed. Mine were soft and colorful. Hers were gray, branded with her initials. I didn't ask where my things went, I knew. They were somewhere in the pile of boxes by the back door, the ones labeled storage and donate. While they filmed in the kitchen, I stayed in the laundry room. I could hear Clara's voice through the walls, bright, practiced, full of fake warmth. Hey guys, welcome back to the Glow Up Kitchen. Today we're talking about starting fresh. Every time she said fresh, something inside me tightened. When the crew left, I went back into the kitchen. Everything was spotless, too clean, like no one actually lived there. My old tea tin was sitting on the counter with a sticky note. Expired. It wasn't expired, it just didn't fit her image. That afternoon, I took a cardboard box from the garage and started collecting what was left of my things. Not because anyone asked me to, because I didn't want to see them thrown away. A chipped mug, a small porcelain bowl, a linen napkin with a faint coffee stain. Every piece felt like it carried a memory, but in that house, they had nowhere to belong. When I opened the cupboard under the sink, something slid out. It was a folded piece of paper, old and yellowed at the edges. I opened it carefully. It was the wedding invitation. Evan and Clara's. One corner was torn off and the ink had faded. I ran my thumb over my son's name. I remember how proud I was that day. How I helped sew the table runners for their reception. How she thanked me on camera with a smile that never reached her eyes. Now, standing in the same house, holding the same invitation, I thought, even memories can be redecorated. Later that day, Evan came home from work. He walked into the kitchen, saw the boxes, and frowned. "What's this?" he asked. "Just sorting things," I said. "Mom, you don't have to do that. Clara's just reorganizing." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I'm helping." He looked like he wanted to say more but didn't. He just nodded and left. That evening, Clara asked if I'd seen her ring light. I hadn't. She looked around, sighed, and said, "You know, sometimes I can't find anything in this house. It's so old-fashioned." Old-fashioned? That word again. She didn't even look at me when she said it. I wanted to remind her that this old-fashioned house had raised her husband, paid for his college, carried his father's coffin. But I didn't. There's a kind of silence that feels heavier than shouting. That night, after they went to bed, I sat in the kitchen again. The neon sign still glowed from the next room. Glow up every day. Its light spilled into the hallway, flickering against the floor. I opened my old notebook, the one I hadn't touched since my husband passed, and wrote a single sentence. I feel like a tenant in my own story. I stared at the words for a long time. They didn't even feel dramatic. They felt accurate. I closed the book and looked around the room. Everything looked perfect, polished, staged. If someone walked in, they'd think it was a happy home. But it wasn't. It was a set. I leaned back in the chair, looking at the lamp on the table. The light caught half my face in the reflection on the window, one side bright, the other fading into the dark. That's exactly how I felt. Half here, half gone. Down the hall, I heard them laughing softly. It wasn't cruel, just careless. And that made it worse. I turned off the lamp, sat there in the dark for a moment longer, and whispered to myself, if I'm just a guest, I might as well start planning my exit. But I didn't move yet. Not that night. I was looking for milk that morning when I found it. A small postcard half hidden behind a jar of almond butter. I almost threw it away, thinking it was one of Clara's notes for her next video. But then I saw the handwriting. It was June Barrett. June and I used to teach together years ago. She handled pottery. I taught art for kids. Every Friday, our hands would be covered in paint, chalk, and glue. We used to laugh about how the kids somehow always managed to color their faces more than their paper. The postcard was bright yellow, a picture of a small lake and a red cabin surrounded by pines. On the back, her handwriting was still as neat as ever. If it ever gets too heavy, Silverwood still has a room for artists like us. June. I read that line twice, then again. It felt like she had written it yesterday, even though the postmark said 6 months ago. I ran my thumb along the edge of the card and just stood there for a while, the refrigerator still open behind me. Silverwood. I hadn't heard that name in years. It was an artist's retreat, quiet, tucked away, a place for people who wanted to start over. June had gone there after her husband passed. I remember she called once, told me the mornings there smelled like paint thinner and pine needles, and that the silence didn't feel empty, just clean. I put the postcard on the table and made myself tea. The kitchen was silent again, just the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of the wall clock. From upstairs, I could hear Clara's voice recording something. She sounded cheerful, rehearsed. Evan was probably in another room, pretending not to notice. I stared at the postcard, wondering what it would feel like to live somewhere that didn't require me to be careful all the time, somewhere I wasn't in the way. After breakfast, I went to the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. Dust covered everything, but it was still mine. Boxes labeled art supplies, Evan, childhood, books. I opened one of the boxes and found my old painting kit. The tin was rusted, the brushes stiff, the tubes of paint half dry. I opened one anyway. The smell of old oil paint hit me so suddenly it made my chest ache. I set up a small space near the window, put down some newspaper, and opened the sketch pad I hadn't touched in 5 years. The first few lines came out shaky. I'd forgotten how to hold the brush, how to mix the colors just right. But my hands remembered faster than I expected. I painted what I saw. Not the house, not the people in it. Just the feeling. A kitchen without warmth, bright lights that didn't belong to me. The reflection of a woman sitting alone, holding a teacup that wasn't hers. By the time I stopped, the sun had started to fade. The painting was simple, rough even, but honest. It showed a room that looked full but felt empty. In the corner, I'd painted a small glow from the neon sign. Glow up every day. It looked colder in the painting than in real life. When I stepped back to look at it, I realized it was the first thing I had created just for myself in years. Not for the school, not for Evan, not for anyone to hang on the wall or praise. Just for me. I didn't cry, but I felt something loosen inside me, like a knot finally giving way. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was space. Space to breathe. Later that night, I heard Evan and Clara in the living room. They were watching a video she'd posted that day. I could hear her voice echoing from the TV, bright and confident. "She's such a natural," Evan said proudly. I smiled to myself. I used to think pride was something you felt for your children. That night, I learned it could also be something you reclaimed for yourself. When they went upstairs, I went back to the attic. The postcard was still on the table. I picked it up again, tracing June's words with my finger. If it ever gets too heavy. It was heavy. Not just the house, the silence, the looks, the way everything that was once mine had been slowly replaced by something newer, shinier, emptier. But for the first time, I realized I didn't have to stay under it. I looked around the attic again. My husband's old easel stood in the corner, still covered with dried paint. His last work had been left unfinished, a sketch of the garden outside, half-colored, half-blank. I ran my hand across the wooden frame. That night, I painted again. I didn't think. I just worked. The brush scraped, the colors mixed unevenly, but I kept going. I painted a kitchen, mine, but not mine. The table was empty, the lights were harsh. There were no people, no warmth, no laughter, just the hum of something that looked alive but wasn't. When I finished, I sat down and looked at it. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It was the truth. A piece of the story no one else wanted to see. I left the brush in the water and went downstairs. The house was quiet. Clara's ring light glowed faintly in the living room. Evan's computer was still on, screensaver pulsing. I turned both off and stood in the dark for a while, just listening. In that silence, something shifted again. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. I went back to the postcard one more time before bed. I placed it on my nightstand right beside my glasses and the small lamp. I whispered, almost without realizing it, "Maybe it's time to go." And then, in my mind, another voice answered. My own. They moved in. I moved inward. It happened on a quiet afternoon. I was folding laundry when I heard a noise outside. A sharp crash, followed by silence. I looked out the window and saw the trash bin tipped over near the driveway. Something white and broken was sticking out from the top. I walked outside, not rushing, just knowing somehow that it was mine. When I reached the bin, I saw it clearly, the ceramic vase, the one I'd given my husband on our 25th anniversary. It was split clean down the middle, one half resting inside the trash, the other lying in the dirt. I picked up the broken piece and held it in both hands. The crack ran through the middle like a scar. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I had forgotten what it felt like to hold something that used to mean love. Evan was standing near the porch, talking on his phone. He saw me looking at the vase, but didn't stop the call. He turned slightly away and said, lowering his voice, "It's just old junk, Clara. Don't worry." I stood there, the word junk hanging in the air like smoke. When he ended the call, I asked, "Who threw it away?" He hesitated. "It broke this morning. Clara thought it was best to clean up." "Did you try to fix it?" He didn't answer, just rubbed the back of his neck, eyes on the ground. "It's old, Mom. Things wear out." He went back inside, leaving me standing there in the yard with the broken vase. The wind moved through the grass, and I knelt down to pick up the smaller pieces one by one. I didn't rush. Each piece felt heavy, like I was gathering parts of my own story. When I came inside, Clara was filming again in the living room. The ring light was on, her voice upbeat and cheerful. "Hey, everyone. Today we're doing a full reset, cleaning out old energy and bringing in the new." Behind her, I could see the shelf where the vase used to be. Empty, perfectly styled. I walked past her quietly and went to the kitchen. I spread the broken pieces on the table. There were 7 of them, big enough to recognize, small enough to never fit the same again. For a while, I just looked at them, and then the memories came back, not in pictures, but in sounds. The slow hum of the old pottery wheel, my husband's laugh when the clay wobbled, the way he wiped his hands on my apron and said, "It's not perfect, but it's us." That was the day we made the first vase together. I painted it pale blue and gave it to him the following year with a small note tucked inside. Still learning, still together. I ran my finger across the edge of one shard, careful not to cut myself. I whispered, "Still together," even though now it was just me. Then the music started. Loud. Heavy beats coming from Clara's phone speaker. It filled every corner of the house, bouncing off the new walls she had painted white for better lighting. The noise made the whole place feel smaller. I walked into the living room, still holding one half of the vase. She didn't notice me at first. She was adjusting her camera, checking her reflection. When she finally saw me, she turned the volume down slightly. "Everything okay, Mom?" she asked, her voice sweet and sharp at the same time. "This was in the trash," I said. She glanced at it. "Oh, that." "Yeah, it cracked. I meant to tell you. It didn't really fit the new look." "The new look?" She nodded, looking at her phone again. "Fresh, you know? Lighter, cleaner." I looked down at the broken vase in my hands. "Fresh doesn't mean soulless," I said quietly. She stopped scrolling, just for a second. Then she looked straight at me. Her tone changed. "Some things are better replaced?" I met her eyes. "Not all replacements improve the original." She didn't answer. She just turned back to her phone, the reflection of the ring light circling her eyes. The music started again. I went back to the kitchen, closed the door, and sat down. The pieces of the vase were still on the table, scattered like a puzzle no one wanted to finish. I tried to fit 2 of them together. The edges matched for a moment, but the gap in the middle stayed. It wasn't about the vase anymore. It was about everything that couldn't go back to what it was. I thought about throwing it all away, but I couldn't. I found an old shoebox, lined it with paper, and placed the pieces inside carefully. When I closed the lid, I felt a small kind of peace, the kind that comes when you stop pretending something can still be fixed. Later that night, I walked into the living room. The same space that used to hold birthdays, anniversaries, arguments, and laughter. Now it smelled like candle wax and hairspray. On the table sat a sheet of paper. Clara's handwriting again. "Old things must go." I looked at it for a long time. Then I picked it up, walked to the fireplace, and threw it in. The flames caught quickly, curling the edges until the words disappeared. For a moment, the firelight flickered across the glass frames on the wall, catching my reflection. My face looked calm, not angry, not broken, just awake. Behind me, I heard Clara calling out, asking if I'd seen her light stand. I didn't answer. I stood there watching the paper turn to ash, feeling something settle deep inside me. Not bitterness, not revenge, just certainty. When the fire dimmed, I picked up the shoebox with the broken vase and carried it upstairs. I placed it on my dresser beside the postcard from June Barrett. The one that said, "If it ever gets too heavy." I sat on the edge of the bed, the light still flickering in the hallway. In the mirror, the reflection caught my eyes. Steady, quiet, but alive. For the first time in months, I looked like myself again. The next morning, I left the house before they woke up. No reason, no note. I just needed air that didn't belong to them. I walked 3 blocks down Main Street until I saw the small cafe on the corner, Brew and Brush. The name made me smile. I hadn't been there in years. Martha Klein owned it. We'd gone to art school together before life took us in different directions. She kept painting, I started teaching. The cafe was exactly how I remembered her. Warm, messy, full of stories. The air smelled like cinnamon, paint, and something sweet I couldn't name. When I walked in, Martha was behind the counter tying her apron. She looked up, squinted for a second, and then laughed. "Eleanor Whitmore," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "Now there's a face I didn't expect to see before noon." I smiled. I figured it was time I had something stronger than tea. She laughed again, poured 2 cups of coffee, and motioned toward the back corner. "Still take cream?" "Still do." We sat by the window, the light spilling across the table in uneven patches. On the wall beside us hung one of her paintings, a garden in late autumn. Warm golds, burnt orange, a single wooden chair under the trees. She caught me looking at it. "You remember that piece?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "You started it the year your husband left." She grinned. "And finished it the year I stopped caring." We sat for a while without talking. It wasn't awkward. Just quiet in the way only old friends can manage. Finally, she said, "I heard you're living with an influencer. Brave of you." I let out a dry laugh. "Or foolish." Her eyebrows lifted. "She's your daughter-in-law, right?" "Yes." "And my new landlord, decorator, and life coach. All rolled into one." She winced. "That bad?" I looked down at my cup. "Let's just say the house looks perfect. I don't." Martha leaned back, studying me the way she used to when we were sketching models in class. "You've lost weight," she said softly. "And something else, too. The spark you used to have. You remember? The one that made you paint in the middle of the night?" I nodded. "It burned out." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You just stopped feeding it." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I smiled faintly. "You always did talk like a motivational poster." "Maybe," she said, "but that doesn't make it wrong." We sat again in silence, sipping coffee. Outside, people walked by in heavy coats. Inside, the cafe smelled like baked apples and turpentine. Martha finally said, "You know what the problem with people like Clara is?" "What?" "She thinks she's creating something new, but really she's just repainting what already exists. And one day the paint peels." I smiled. "You always had a way of putting it." She shrugged. You always had a way of forgetting it." I looked back at the painting on the wall, the autumn garden. Something about it drew me in. The colors, the stillness, the unfinished feeling. Martha followed my eyes. "That was supposed to be yours, wasn't it?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You started that painting, not me. Back in '98, remember? You stopped halfway, said it looked too sad. I finished it when you left for the teaching job." For a moment, I didn't breathe. I remembered that day, the 2 of us in her studio, music playing, the smell of wet paint everywhere. I'd painted half the garden before telling her to keep it. I never came back for it. "It's beautiful," I said quietly. "It's unfinished," she corrected. "You just stopped too soon." We both looked at the painting again. The empty chair in the middle suddenly felt like it was waiting for something. Or someone. Martha took another sip of coffee, then leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Listen, Eleanor, if you don't claim your story, someone else will paint over it." Her words landed hard, sharper than I expected. She reached for her bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a folded brochure, Silverwood Artist Retreat. I recognized the name immediately. June Barrett's postcard had mentioned the same place. Martha slid it across the table. "June told me to give this to you if you ever showed up." I stared at it. She smiled. "She said there's still a studio waiting. I think you should take it." I shook my head. "I can't just walk away." "Can't or won't. I have responsibilities." Martha raised an eyebrow. "To who?" "The people who threw your life into the trash can?" I didn't answer. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was warm, steady. Maybe it's time to stop fixing what broke and start building what's next. The words sat between us for a while. Somewhere behind the counter, the coffee grinder started buzzing, and the sound filled the quiet. I looked at the painting again, the garden, the chair, the colors that felt like old memories trying to come back to life. I thought of my husband's easel still covered in dust, of the postcard from June, of the shoebox upstairs with the broken vase, all the things I kept because I didn't know how to start again. Martha squeezed my hand gently. "Silverwood has a studio waiting," she said. I met her eyes. "Maybe it's time," she added, "to finish that garden." Martha placed her hand over mine. "Silverwood has a studio waiting," she said. "Maybe it's time to finish that garden." That night, I sat alone with the phone on the table and the brochure open beside it. I had read the same 3 lines so many times the paper felt warm. I wasn't waiting for permission. I was making sure I would not change my mind halfway through the call. The house was finally quiet. I knew if I didn't do it now, I would wake up tomorrow and tell myself to wait one more day, and then another, until nothing changed, and I became the kind of woman who apologizes for wanting air. I dialed the number slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to hear each click and know I was the one moving this forward. A calm voice answered and said the name of the place. I told her I was calling about availability, and she asked the question that settled everything inside me. "Would you like a shared room or private studio?" I said, "Private, completely." There was a short pause, the kind that belongs to typing and checking schedules, and then she said there was a south-facing space with its own work table and storage. She asked if I preferred a morning check-in, and I said yes, the 22nd, 10 o'clock. She confirmed the time, took my details, told me what to bring, and ended with a simple welcome that felt heavier than any goodbye I had heard in years. When the call ended, I did not cry, and I did not shake. I let the receiver rest for a moment in my hand, then put it back in its place. The room did not look different, but the choices in it did. On the desk was a letter my husband had written long before he got sick, a page I kept because it sounded like him even after he was gone. I read the one line that always steadied me. "If they forget your strength, remind them quietly." I put the page down and said the words out loud once, not as a memory, but as instructions. There are decisions that parade themselves, and there are decisions that do not need an audience. Mine belonged to the second kind. I took a small pad, wrote the word departure, and then the date and time the woman had confirmed. The note did not carry drama, it held a plan. I smoothed the edge with my thumb and pressed it to the mirror where I dress each day. I wanted to see it first thing when I woke, last thing before I slept, and every time I thought about giving back the space I had just claimed. I started a list the way I used to make lists before school trips when Evan was little. Identification, prescriptions, a few changes of clothes that did not wrinkle easily, the small sketchbook I had begun using again, the pencils that still felt right in my hand, and the postcard from June that had been the first push. I added the envelope I had already prepared with the bank changes and the final notes about the house, simple and clear so no one could pretend to misunderstand. I did not explain my feelings in that letter. I listed facts, dates, and signatures the way adults do when they want something to hold in a lawyer's office. From the hallway came the low sound of the television and Clara's voice on a call, full of energy that never seemed to run out. I could hear Evan answering her with short words and safe promises. None of it belonged to me anymore. I was done trying to fit myself into the background of someone else's plan, done measuring my steps so I did not disturb a schedule that did not include me. I set the suitcase on the chair and opened it so it would be ready in the morning. I folded what I needed and left space for what I might pick up when I arrived. I did not overpack. I had learned the hard way that too much weight invites hesitation. I sat again and looked at the mirror. The note was small, but it drew the eye more than any frame certificate I had ever hung. It said only that I was leaving and when. It did not say why, because that part was already finished. The why had been written over months of being moved aside and renamed for convenience. I did not need to argue the past. I only needed to keep my next promise to myself. I called the taxi company and booked a car for the exact time I wanted to leave the house. The dispatcher repeated the address and the hour and told me the driver would text when he was close. I thanked him and ended the call with the same steady feeling I had held since I said private. Completely. A plan is not freedom, but it is the door to it, and I had finally turned the handle. I prepared an envelope for Evan and set it on the hallway table where he could not miss it. I kept it short. I told him the house was no longer his responsibility, that the accounts connected to my name were closed to him, and that any questions would need to go through the attorney whose card I attached. I did not use the word disappointed. I did not use the word forgive. I did not ask for understanding. I wrote like someone who has learned that clarity is kinder than comfort. I returned to the room and checked the list again. I added a small frame photo I had kept in a drawer because I could not stand to see it handled carelessly. It was the one of Evan at 12, holding a school project he was proud of, smiling without caution. I put it face down in the luggage between two sweaters so it would not break. It was not for display, it was for me. There are nights that swallow you and nights that hand you back to yourself. This one did the second. I turned off the lamp, knowing the house would make its usual sounds. I let them pass through me without giving them names. I did not listen for footsteps or doors. I did not rehearse a speech for the morning. The only line I needed was already on the mirror. Before I lay down, I looked again at my husband's page. If they forget your strength, remind them quietly. I had tried to remind them by staying useful, by being patient, by not making anything harder than it had to be. That is not strength. That is a bargain you make when you are afraid to be called ungrateful. Quiet can be surrender, but it can also be a boundary. I chose the second kind. I slept for a few hours and woke before dawn without an alarm. I made myself tea and did not worry about whose schedule it might interrupt. I packed the mug I still liked because I would need something familiar to hold while I learned the new place. I left the kitchen as I found it. I did not leave notes on counters. I did not straighten the things that did not belong to me. I kept my energy for the day I had decided to live. When the car pulled to the curb, I did not hesitate. I carried my suitcase to the door and put the envelope where it belonged. I looked once at the hallway that had held so many arrivals and departures and knew this one would not be undone. I did not look for anyone to say goodbye. Some endings are better without an audience. Before I stepped out, I walked back to the mirror and pressed the note one more time so it would not curl. Departure, October 22nd, 10 a.m. I said the words once and let them settle. Then I turned off the light and opened the door. Some exits are rehearsed in silence. This one was, and it was mine. The next morning, the town was covered in a light drizzle. I took the early taxi to Main Street, the same one I used to walk with my husband when errands still meant something small and simple. The car stopped in front of a narrow brick building wedged between a stationery store and a barber shop that had been closed for months. The sign above the door still read Alden Leland and Associates, the same gold letters that had hung there for over 40 years. Inside, nothing much had changed. The smell of old paper and furniture polish, the same yellow lamp on the reception desk, the same steady hum of silence that lawyers seem to cultivate so well. Mrs. Danner, the secretary, looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "he's expecting you." I walked down the short hall to the office at the end. The door was half open, and through it I could see Mr. Leland sitting behind his desk, glasses low on his nose, flipping through a thick folder. He stood when he saw me. "Eleanor," he said, his voice exactly as calm as I remembered. "It's been too long." I sat across from him, and for a moment we just looked at each other, two people who had both outlived their plans. The walls behind him were lined with books that looked too heavy to ever move again. The light was soft and yellow, not the sharp kind that exposes things, but the kind that lets them rest. He opened the folder and adjusted his glasses. "Your husband once told me," he said, "that if anything ever happened, I should protect your art." I smiled faintly. He knew I'd forget to protect myself first. Mr. Leland gave a small nod, not of agreement, but of understanding. He was very clear about that. He also believed you'd find your way back to it when the time came. He slid a set of documents across the desk. These papers finalized the transfer. The house, the savings accounts, the assets connected to the name Whitmore, they'll move into the Whitmore Trust for Forgotten Women Artists. I looked at the name printed across the top of the first page. It felt right, solid, like something that could stand on its own without explanation. The trust was not for me alone. It was for women who had painted in kitchens, drawn in spare moments, and hidden their talent behind the word duty. He continued. The trust will provide small grants and studio residencies for older women returning to art after caregiving or loss. It's structured to run independently, managed by the foundation board. You will retain honorary oversight, but no financial liability. I nodded. That's what I want. He pointed to the signature lines. Here and here. I signed without hesitation. My hand did not shake. Each stroke of the pen felt like clearing a surface long cluttered with noise. When I finished, Mr. Leland leaned back slightly. "You're leaving everything behind," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. I folded the pen and looked up at him. "No," I said quietly. "I'm leaving it where it belongs. In my name." For a while, neither of us spoke. The rain outside tapped gently against the window, steady and patient. He finally closed the folder and said, "You know, your husband would have been proud." I smiled. "Maybe. But this one's mine." He walked me to the door, holding it open the way gentlemen used to do when that still meant respect instead of habit. "Take care of yourself, Eleanor," he said. "Silverwood will suit you." I nodded. "I think so." When I stepped outside, the rain had grown softer, like mist more than weather. The streetlights reflected on the wet pavement, turning it gold. I didn't open my umbrella. I let the rain fall, light and clean, against my coat and hair. Each drop felt like something washing away, not memory, not sadness, but the layer of silence I'd carried for years. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I walked slowly down the block, past the shop windows and empty bus stop, feeling the weight of nothing on my shoulders. People talk about freedom like it's a loud thing, like a door slamming open or a shout in the dark, but sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a pen sliding across paper in a lawyer's office and the sound of rain afterward. I reached the corner, waiting for the light to change, and caught my reflection in a window. For once I recognized the woman looking back. She wasn't someone's wife, mother, or caretaker. She wasn't a background character in someone else's story. She was me. I smiled. Not wide, not forced, just enough to feel it. The rain kept falling, but it no longer felt cold. The morning of October 22nd came without ceremony. I woke before the sun, the house still wrapped in that heavy, half-silent air that lingers before everyone else wakes. I made coffee the way I always did, one scoop too strong, no sugar, and drank it standing by the kitchen window. The yard was covered in damp leaves. A few of them clung stubbornly to the maple tree out front, red and gold against the gray sky. I had already packed the night before. My suitcase waited by the door, the same one that had followed me through every version of my life. I didn't rush. There was no reason to. I moved through each room one last time, straightening what needed straightening, closing drawers that hadn't been closed properly in months. The house looked tidy, almost polite, as if it were pretending to be calm for my sake. In the kitchen, I placed a white envelope on the table. Across the front, I wrote in even, steady letters, "To be opened after my departure." Inside was a short note. I had rewritten it 3 times to make sure it sounded neither bitter nor sentimental. "You can repaint the walls, but you can't erase history. I love this home enough to let it go. No explanation, no apology, no return address. Just truth, clean and simple." I left the letter where they would find it, not hidden, not displayed, just placed exactly in the middle of the table where it would be impossible to ignore. When I turned around, Clara was standing in the doorway. Her hair was tied up, her phone in her hand, the same way she always started her mornings. She looked surprised to see the suitcase beside me. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes." She frowned. "Now? You didn't say anything?" "I didn't need to." She hesitated as if unsure whether to sound concerned or offended. "Where are you going?" I looked at her directly. My voice was calm, almost gentle, to a place where my name isn't a footnote. She blinked, not understanding at first. Then she looked toward the envelope on the table. "Is that for us?" "Yes." She opened her mouth as if to say something else, but I was already turning toward the door. From the hallway, Evan's voice called out, "Mom, what's happening?" He appeared at the top of the stairs, half-dressed, still groggy. I met his eyes, the way you look at someone you've finally stopped waiting for. "Everything's fine," I said. "Take care of her." He started to come down the steps, but I raised a hand. "Don't. Just let me go." For a moment, the 3 of us stood there in the kind of silence that says more than any argument ever could. Then I opened the door. The air outside was crisp, carrying that faint metallic smell rain leaves behind. I stepped onto the porch. The taxi was already waiting at the curb, engine running. I could see the driver glancing at his watch, patient but ready. Behind me, Clara said softly, "You don't have to do this." I turned just enough to answer, "I already did." Then I pulled the door closed. The latch clicked. Not loud, not final, just enough. I walked down the steps, my suitcase rolling behind me, wheels bumping lightly against the wood. The maple leaves on the ground shifted in the wind, bright red against the gray morning. They looked almost like fire, so not destructive, just alive. When I reached the car, I took one last look at the house. The curtains moved slightly, like the place itself was exhaling. For years, I had called it home. Now it was just a house, one that would go on existing without me, holding echoes of dinners, arguments, birthdays, and quiet nights. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I got into the car, shut the door, and told the driver, Silverwood Artist Retreat. He nodded, adjusted the rear view mirror, and pulled away. As the house disappeared from view, I watched the reflection of the falling leaves in the window. The wind picked up, swirling them in small circles. Some caught in the air, some fell softly back to the ground. It wasn't an ending. It was movement, quiet, steady, overdue. The door closed behind her, and outside the wind caught the maple leaves. They spun once in the air, red as fire, and fell without a sound. 3 months later, I stood inside the main hall of Silverwood. The walls were warm with soft yellow light, and the air hummed with quiet excitement, the kind that fills a room right before something begins. The exhibition was called The Forgotten Hands. I had spent weeks helping the other residents hang their work, pottery, sketches, small sculptures made from driftwood and wire, women who had once been mothers, caretakers, widows, teachers. Now they were artists again. No one here asked for permission to exist. The hall smelled faintly of coffee and varnish. Soft piano played from a small speaker near the back. People moved slowly between the displays, stopping to read names written on simple white cards. No titles meant to impress, no pretension, just truth made visible. At the center of the room stood a single canvas, my piece. Maple Haven in Autumn Light. It showed a woman standing in front of a door, suitcase by her side, the light spilling in from behind her. Her face wasn't detailed, it didn't need to be. The light told her story. When I painted it, I didn't plan to show it publicly. I only wanted to see what leaving looked like. But the director insisted it belonged here in the center, not hidden in a corner. Now people were gathered around it, talking quietly. I didn't move closer. I just watched from a few steps away, my hands folded. Someone asked if the woman in the painting was leaving or arriving. I didn't answer. Both were true. June Barrett appeared beside me, a glass of cider in her hand, her shawl slipping slightly from her shoulder. You always did like backlight, she said, smiling. Because it hides the face, I replied. No, she said softly, because it shows what's behind it. I laughed under my breath. You still talk like an art critic. And you still paint like someone who finally stopped asking for approval, she said, patting my arm before disappearing into the crowd. I turned back toward the painting. The light in the hall shifted slightly, catching the varnish and making the figure's outline glow. For a moment, it felt like the painting was breathing. Then I saw him. Evan stood near the entrance, a sketchbook in his hand, shoulders tense as if unsure he was allowed to be there. He hadn't called. He didn't need to. I knew he would come eventually, not for the art, but for understanding. He caught my eye across the room. For a second, he looked like the boy he used to be, nervous, trying to find the right words before I could correct him. Then he started walking toward me slowly, like someone approaching fragile ground. When he reached me, he held out the small book he was carrying. It was one of his old sketch pads, the kind I used to buy him when he was little. The cover was bent, the pages filled with drawings from years ago. I didn't take it. I just looked at him. He swallowed once, before speaking. I saw the foundation announcement, he said. His voice was quiet, careful. The Whitmore Trust. I nodded. It's already helping 3 women here. They start next month. He looked down, turning the sketchbook in his hands. I didn't understand what you were doing back then. I thought you were giving up. And now? I asked. He met my eyes. His voice trembled, but only slightly. Now, I think you were just starting. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds around us faded, the quiet hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the distant piano. He took a slow breath. You were never just my mother, he said. You were my first artist. The words hit me like a slow wave, not pain, not regret, just warmth. I didn't reach for him. I didn't need to. I looked at him the way you look at something finally whole again, not perfect, but no longer broken. He smiled a little, uncertain but real, We stood like that for a while, two people who had finally learned how to speak without defending themselves. Around us, the crowd shifted. Someone nearby raised a glass for a toast. The sound of laughter floated through the air, gentle, human. Evan turned toward the painting. "She looks like you," he said. I shook my head. "She looks like all of us." He nodded, and we stood side by side, watching the woman in the painting face her light. No hugs, no tears, no big music, just presence. That was enough. When the announcement came that the exhibition would now open to the public, people applauded softly. Cameras clicked. A reporter asked me for a quote. I simply said, "This collection isn't about forgotten art. It's about remembered women." The reporter smiled. "And that one?" she asked, pointing to Maple Haven in autumn light. "That one," I said, "is about coming home to yourself." She thanked me and moved on. I turned back toward Evan. He was flipping through his sketchbook now, slower, more careful with each page. I could see small pencil drawings, trees, cups, chairs, faces, life in fragments. He closed it and said, "I started drawing again." I smiled. Good. We didn't say goodbye. He didn't promise to visit. There was no need. The connection was already there, not through obligation, but through understanding. As the crowd began to move toward the reception table, I stepped back to look at the room. The lights glowed soft across the canvases. The piano shifted into something light and steady, a song that sounded like the beginning of something, not the end. I took a breath, slow and full. My hands no longer shook, my heart didn't race. It just felt steady, like it finally knew the rhythm of its own life again. Across the room, Evan turned once more and caught my eye. He lifted his glass slightly, a small, wordless toast. I nodded back. The camera of the world would have pulled away right then. Slow, quiet, showing the two of us standing in the warm light of the gallery, generations framed together, no bitterness left, only understanding. Outside, through the high windows, the late afternoon sun slid lower, spilling gold across the floorboards, turning everything, even the shadows, soft. It felt like breathing. The camera pulls back, the gallery bathed in golden light, piano playing softly, two generations standing side by side, no words, just quiet understanding. Silverwood had settled into a quiet rhythm, mornings filled with the smell of coffee and wet leaves, afternoons with the sound of brushes rinsing in glass jars. It was the kind of silence that held company rather than loneliness. I had started teaching again, just a small class on Tuesday mornings. 6 students, all women, ranging from 60 to 80, except one, a young girl named Lila Monroe. She was 22, soft-spoken, always arriving early but never making eye contact for long. When she first joined, she said she wasn't sure why she'd signed up. "My doctor said I should find something that feels real again," she told me quietly, setting down a set of new brushes still in their plastic wrap. I didn't ask what she meant. You learn after a certain age that not every story needs to be unpacked on day one. Some stories just need room to breathe. The first few weeks she barely spoke. She painted small, careful things, cups, corners, shadows, things that didn't ask to be noticed. But her eyes watched everything, every color I mixed, every way I held the brush. She studied in silence. One morning, after most of the others had gone to lunch, she stayed behind. The room was full of soft winter light, the kind that made everything look like it belonged to a memory. She stood near the easel, looking down at a blank canvas. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said quietly, "do you ever feel too old to start again?" I looked at her and something inside me softened. I could have given her a dozen complicated answers about grief, loss, time, or courage, but instead I just smiled. "No," I said. "I just stopped asking permission." She blinked as if the words surprised her, then nodded slowly. "I wish I could do that," she said. "You can," I told her. "Start small. Don't wait for anyone to agree it's time." I handed her a small leaf I'd picked from the garden earlier that morning, a single red maple leaf still damp at the edges. "Try painting this," I said. "Don't paint what it looks like. Paint what it feels like to hold it." She looked unsure but nodded. Her hands trembled slightly as she began to sketch the first lines. The strokes were uneven, hesitant at first, but soon they found their rhythm. I watched from across the table, letting her work in silence. Around us the room was bright, sunlight catching on the jars of water, the faint hum of a heater in the corner, the distant sound of laughter from the courtyard. When she finally stopped, she turned the canvas toward me. The leaf wasn't perfect, the veins too dark, the shape a little off, but it was alive. It looked like it was still falling. I smiled. "That's beautiful," I said. "Do you know why?" She shook her head. "Because every fall," I told her, "is just another brushstroke in a longer painting." She looked at the canvas for a long time, and then she smiled, small but real, the kind that stays. The other students filtered back into the room, bringing the noise of movement and chatter with them. But for a moment it was just the two of us, standing in that bright space that smelled of paint and sunlight. She reached out suddenly, taking my hand. A simple gesture, unsure but full of gratitude. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. "Thank you," she said. I squeezed her hand gently. "You're welcome. Now keep going. Don't stop just because someone else pauses." Later, when the class ended and everyone had left, I sat by the window, watching the students cross the garden path below. Lila stopped halfway, crouched down to pick up another leaf, then tucked it into her sketchbook before walking on. I turned back to the room. The easels stood empty, the brushes soaking quietly in their jars. On the table near the door, Lila had left her painting to dry. The leaf she'd drawn shimmered faintly under the light. Imperfect, but brave. I smiled to myself. Maybe that was the real lesson all along. That falling isn't failure, it's movement, it's color, it's life still in progress. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, turning the frost on the window into small glimmers of light. The day had started again, as days always do. Lila reached for Eleanor's hand. The morning light filled the room, white and soft, as if the world itself was still painting them both into the same story. The room is quiet except for the sound of brushes against canvas. Morning light spills through the wide windows of silverwood, turning the air soft and gold. Lila sits beside me, her hair falling forward as she leans toward the easel, careful with each stroke. The world outside is slow, the way I once wished life could be. I dip my brush in the paint, steady and sure. We don't talk much anymore when we paint. We don't need to. The silence is no longer heavy. It's alive, like a heartbeat underneath everything. For a long time, I thought love was measured by how much you could give away. Your time, your patience, your quiet. I thought love meant saying yes, even when the yes cost you everything. But I've learned something different now. Love also means knowing when to leave the table. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because you finally understand that staying silent for too long is just another way of disappearing. Leaving is not rejection, it's recognition. When you stand up and walk away from a place that has forgotten you, you are not abandoning love. You are walking it home back to where it first began, with yourself. I used to think departure meant loss. But departure isn't loss, it's return. Return to the person you were before the noise, before the apologies, before you made yourself small so others could feel big. Now, every morning here feels like a second chance I didn't know I was allowed to ask for. The air smells of paint and pine. The students laugh. We drink too much coffee. Someone hums while cleaning the brushes. It's ordinary, but that's what makes it sacred. Sometimes I still think of the old house, the sound of the floorboards, the weight of the quiet, the table where I used to wait for words that never came. But the memory doesn't hurt anymore. It just feels like a closed book resting on a shelf where it belongs. When I look at Lila bent over her canvas, I see pieces of myself years ago, uncertain, waiting for permission to exist. And I see the difference now. No one is waiting for her to shrink. The room around her is wide, full of light. She looks up and smiles. I nod, because I know what that smile means. It's the small, silent moment when you realize you've stopped surviving and started living again. I think about all the women who never got to see that day. The ones who stayed too long in houses that didn't remember their names, who gave everything and called it duty, who were told that silence was grace. If this story finds them, wherever they are, I hope they hear this. You can start again. You can always start again. Because you were never too late. You were just waiting for the quiet to finally listen. The camera moves slowly across the room. Brushes, sketches, colors scattered across tables like small pieces of life finding their way back. Outside, the maple tree sways gently in the wind. Its leaves fall, red and bright, catching the sunlight before they touch the ground. The trunk stands firm, roots deep in the soil. Every leaf that falls is just another season passing through. In the corner, the finished painting rests on the easel. The autumn garden, completed. Not perfect, not polished, but whole. I set my brush down and take a breath. Lila looks at me, waiting for a cue, and I simply say, "That's enough for today." She nods, smiling, her hands still stained with red and gold. As the camera pulls back, the room fades into warm light. The sound of the piano rises, soft, patient, like the rhythm of someone learning to breathe again. My voice comes one last time, low and steady. I used to think love meant saying yes, but love also means knowing when to leave the table. Departure isn't loss, it's return. To yourself. The camera moves through the open window. Outside, the maple leaves fall quietly, landing on the grass like small, deliberate brushstrokes. The world doesn't end. It just keeps painting. And at the bottom of the screen, as the light fades out, the words appear, dedicated to those who left quietly and found themselves loudly